Welcome to the Bootloader. I'm Todd Kurt.
And I'm Paul Cutler. We're excited to welcome a special guest today, Brent Rubell of Adafruit Industries. The show works like this. We've each brought two things to share, which we'll talk about, but for no longer than 5 minutes each. We have detailed show notes and transcripts available at thebootloader.net. Brent, welcome to the show.
Hello, happy to be here.
What's the first one that you brought for us this episode?
Okay, for my first one, we have Wippersnapper's offline mode. So I'm biased on this note. I work for Adafruit as an engineer. Back up and explain this item. Wippersnapper is firmware I work on. It enables people to visually create internet-connected electronics project. This means you can click your way into a functioning prototype. No programming involved. It's really good for scientists, artists, and non-technical people to get projects off the ground that they want to get going. And my colleague Lauren and I work on Wippersnapper. He's the web side of things. I'm the embedded side of things. And we also have other people work on this project, but we're the main two leads. It's been pretty fun. It's been out for a while now. I think we were talking about that, Paul. It's the original guide's 2020, and it was an alpha, then beta. And now the beta tag's about to be ripped off. So we spent the last year rewriting the API that involves rewriting the firmware. And then one of the more fun things I think that we've added is offline mode. So we didn't intend to add this feature at all. I needed a way of testing the API and functionality. And Lauren was he's busy with something else right now as far as development. And usually we work in tandem. He'll implement things and then I'll come in on the embedded side and I'll implement things. And then we'll just work like that. But right now it's I was stuck. So we added this feature that allows you to create a project on Adafruit.io, download a file, which is a JSON encoded file, and then you just drag it onto the device. Then the device reads back this file and automatically configures itself, starts logging data out to an SD card. So there's no network connection, but the grand idea of creating a device by clicking some buttons on a website still exists. It's cool. There's nothing like this where you can just create a project and download it and it starts logging data. And it's also sitting, it's doing a magic trick where it sits on the same firmware. So if you insert an SD card and add this special file, then it will switch into offline mode. And if you don't do that, it will switch into online mode and start logging out to Adafruit.io. So this is a totally weird little side project that I'm working on that I think is going to be really useful for mostly people working on environmental sensing projects, because it's the existing ways of getting these up and running do involve programming, or they do involve buying this NCD makes these $300 to $400 versions of this, which are kind of expensive for a nonprofit. So the board I used in the guide is the Ada logger, which is really cheap, and then a BME sensor, which is also so the whole thing comes in under $50, which is a big difference from $400.
Totally. Yeah, this is kind of amazing because first there's just the Whippersnapper thing itself, which totally solved sort of the last conceptual mile problem for me of okay, I've got a thing that can send MQTT messages and maybe I set up a broker somewhere, but then how do I actually configure what all the messages mean? And how do I ensure that there's no sort of decay between the sender and the receiver? And Whippersnapper and Adafruit.io kind of made all that just not be a problem. It just kind of, you configure it and it updates the device. And now you can do that for data logging, which is, I don't know, it seems like a totally separate thing than Whippersnapper to me. A huge thing. It should almost have its own separate name to me, but I like that it's under the umbrella of Whippersnapper. So it's all the same configuration, all the same UI that you use to configure it.
Yeah, the name's mutable. I haven't changed it yet. I haven't done anything. I'm just it logs offline and it also sends data online. But I haven't. If you have a name, Todd, let me know.
I have no idea. That's the thing is that I think drafting off the Whippersnapper concept is really handy because people know that I can use Whippersnapper to quickly configure a device. I want to hook up this sensor to this pin and this other sensor to this other pin, and that you don't have to write any code to do that. You just drag and drop and things and. If that is what Whippersnapper is, then the output mode could either be MQTT or it can be an SD card text file, I guess.
Yeah.
And I got to believe there's a subset of people out there who don't want to connect to Adafruit.io or don't want it network connected. Yeah. So this is a great tool for those kind of people who want to keep their devices offline or off the IoT networks or whatever they're doing.
I think that's growing too. You're seeing Home Assistant and more projects get popular because it's people don't want to put their data on commercial servers, or Adafruit server is pretty great as far as maintaining your privacy rights, but like the bigger like AWS and Google, and also like wherever my robot vacuum sends the server image, like the image of my house that's like lighter mapped. I don't know where it's
Totally.
going, but like an SD card that I can like pop out of the device, that's pretty rad.
Yeah, I mean, also just for longevity, like the internet between your device and the server recording the information, there are so many points of failure there. And with the SD
Yeah.
card, it's just the device. There's like so few places it can go wrong. I'm glad we have that alternative now. Awesome. Thanks.
All right, Todd, what did you bring us this episode?
Okay, so a couple weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks, 1 week, there is now 200 megahertz clock support for the RP2040. Good news, everyone. What does this mean? It's a free speed boost for your Pico. Raspberry Pi officially supports overclocking the Pico RP2040. When the RP2040 chip that's in the Pico was first announced, the Pico SDK library that you use with it ran the chip at 125 megahertz, even though the datasheet for the chip says it's 133 megahertz apart. So there's already a little bit of like, hey, why is it underclocked? Sometimes that means that the manufacturer is a little bit conservative with their design, so they kind of run it slower than what their specs were, just in case there's problems. But it turned out the RP2040 has been incredibly overclockable. People have been doubling its speed to 250 megahertz with no downsides, as far as pretty much I've known that you could do this. Many of my RP2040 based CircuitPython synth projects run at that 250 megahertz because you can get a higher quality sample rate for your audio stuff. And normally overclocking on CPUs is frowned upon by the manufacturer. You can actually burn up a desktop CPU when you overclock it. So Intel is usually like, no, But of course, there's all these cool gamer overclocking rigs that have been liquid cooled and stuff to make it tell you like double the speed. So some of the vendors who have made RP2040 based things have been reluctant to sell something that depended upon an overclocked RP2040 because of this sort of historical fear. But then last week, Raspberry Pi officially announced that the Pico SDK will default to 200 megahertz. That's almost twice the speed. It's like 60% faster or 70% faster. And that speed can be configured via compile time define. In CircuitPython and in the Arduino Pico Arduino core for the RP2040, changing the CPU speed has always been pretty easy. In CircuitPython, you can do it in real time, in the REPL even, by just setting the microcontroller.cpu.frequency parameter. One of the things you can use that for is you can underclock the CPU to make the chip draw less power when it's on a battery. Because one of the cool things about microcontrollers is their power usage scales pretty linearly with clock speed. So if you half the speed of the microcontroller, it's going to draw half the power, almost exactly. And in Arduino, you can do it with a compile time directive that's just in the tools CPU speed menu in the Arduino IDE. It's been pretty cool that we've been able to do this without any seeming repercussions. Like there's this one guy who makes a project called Pico Gus, GUS. It's a sound card, like an old IBM sound card, Gravis Ultrasound, I think was the name of the sound card, that is emulated with a RP2040 chip. And he runs that at 366 megahertz. so clearly the Raspberry Pi team who designed this chip did a pretty good job because it's so overclockable. And now Raspberry Pi officially supports it.
It seemed like it just came out of nowhere after having the RP2040 around for 3-4 years for them just to support it. Sure, people like you were doing it, but all of a sudden they just dropped that news and everyone's like, oh my goodness, this is so cool.
Yeah, it makes me almost wonder if they're like, well, everybody's been doing it and there haven't been any reported problems, so let's just make it official.
Are there any heat issues?
I've not detected any, just from the very gross determination of putting my finger on the chip. Like normally when chips or microcontrollers are running hot, you can just kind of feel it. Go, okay, that doesn't feel right. There's really no obvious observable problems as far as I've seen. Yeah, so yay for us. So hey, Paul, what's your first one this week?
I'm going to come back to something that we've touched on before, but that's microcontrollers as mini computers. Microcontrollers are so powerful that we're starting to see almost full-fledged mini computers being built, which we have talked about in a past episode. We're getting closer every day, and a maker named Abe Haskins has built a small handheld computer called the Slime Deck Zero using Pimoroni's PicoVision as its brain. Abe has a great 25-minute video up on YouTube, and it might sound like it's a little long, but it's engaging as all heck, and I highly recommend checking it out. He shows the entire process and all the parts used to build this tiny handheld computer that runs MicroPython, has an app launcher and operating system called Slime OS, and even has an expansion slot to add additional hardware peripherals. It features a keyboard he disassembled from a $9 remote control, a 5-inch 800 by 460 screen, and uses the PicoVision from Pimoroni as its brains. The PicoVision features two RP2040 chips, one acting as the CPU and the other as the GPU. He created a custom PCB for the keyboard to talk to the PicoVision over I2C using a quick Stemma QT port. One of the neatest features of the Slime Deck Zero is that Abe added this expansion port. Abe demos it by plugging a Zhao microcontroller in that's wired to an LED that the Slime Deck Zero can control. It's running MicroPython, and Abe has created a custom app launcher for it. It's also aware when something is plugged into the expansion port and can display an app, if applicable, for the hardware plugged into the port. The second one is the new Adafruit Fruit Jam. This handheld is something Adafruit's been teasing for the last few weeks, which they've codenamed Fruit Jam. I don't think it'll be the final name. Lady Ada was inspired from a recent Hackaday hack chat with Raspberry Pi's Eben Upton and built a credit card-sized computer using the Raspberry Pi 2350B chip, the one with the extra GPIO. The number of peripherals built in on the Fruit Jam is crazy. It includes 16 mega flash and 8 mega PS RAM, a micro SD card, DVI output using the new HSTX port, IDA stereo headphone, and a mono speaker. Not one, but two USB Type-A ports for USB host for things like keyboards, mice, or game controllers, Stemma QT and Stemma Classic, iSpy for TFT displays, 5 NeoPixels, and 3 switches. So this is literally almost a motherboard for a handheld mini computer. Scott Shawcroft, CircuitPython's lead developer, has been sharing progress on it during his Friday deep dive streams. I can't wait to get my hands on one of these. As soon as they put it up for pre-order, I'm like, notify me, and put my email address in right away.
Yeah, it's just begging to be made into a little tiny video game console looking box, because it's got the two USB ports on the front, like what I'm considering the front, and then it's got the video and power port out the back. I can see a little Nintendo style box for it coming out pretty quickly for it. And there are these like little $10 NES like USB controllers you can get to plug in. And the Fruit Jam also has a row of, I think, maybe 20 or 10 GPIO pins located right behind the USB ports. And that's, I'm thinking, oh, that's a cartridge slot.
Oh,
I mean, the board already has so much memory on it. You don't need to add more memory with the cartridge, but maybe the cartridge is basically just a wiring diagram that kind of enables different programs that are already on the Fruit Gem itself to load. but it'd be fun to actually plug the cartridge in and then play the video game.
absolutely.
I want the Slime Deck. I'm like really interested in the fact it has the expansion port. I've been seeing like more expansion ports on devices like the Framework laptop, super popular, and it has this expansion port and people love it. And they're like, oh, it could be a USB port, it could be an SD card reader. Like, I feel that's getting more popular as far as like things that people want there. And the Flipper Zero has the same thing too. It's like,
Right.
how can I expand this hardware that already has some level of functionality? And
Totally.
I don't know. It's interesting to like see. So like, I built this little computer, and it's like, what else can I do? Oh, maybe I should be able to plug in something. But then it comes back to like, what do I plug in?
Right.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and with the Slime Deck, I think it's interesting that he plugged in a full-blown microcontroller. It's not like he just plugged in a humidity sensor or something. To see a whole Zhao board attached to it being controlled from the PicoVision device, from that brain, was pretty neat.
Yeah, and the build looks pretty good. I'm just kind of amazed that we have microcontrollers that can spit out essentially HDMI and also do Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and it's just like it's a $5 microcontroller.
Right. All right, Brent, what's your second one for us?
Yeah, my second one. Have you guys talked about Obsidian before?
We have not.
All right. I've used like this Evernote program for years. I think John Park uses it too. I have so many notes in Evernote. I tried Notion. Everybody in the software field loves Notion, and it's too advanced. I don't need an entire Wikipedia like system for just my notes. So Obsidian's a notes app. It's kind of boring, but it's good because it's boring. So all of your notes are stored on the device you're writing them. I guess the theme today is for my brain is offline storage. Everything's stored as a markdown file, and you can pop each file open in your editor. So like in the age of like cloud first, it's like great. You can see all your folders, you can see all your files in a folder. It just feels right. It's like I'm writing this file. This file is located here. It's not, I'm writing this file, it's going to a server somewhere, and I don't have this file anymore. What I like is how little it does and how much it can be extended based on how little it does. So like instead of Notion's wiki system, you can actually link each markdown note together, which is really powerful. And if you want to do wiki stuff, you can create your own. And then you can create like little workflows by combining Obsidian and another application. So it's not all like Notion, like sitting in one. So like I use Zotero to organize academic papers, journal articles. Then I can link Zotero entries in my notes, and that's it. Like that's the whole workflow. Another one I have is like Obsidian has a paid plan which lets you sync, but I don't necessarily need the other things in their plan. So I can just, these are files, right? Like to sit on my device. So like I have a Google Drive folder. I move my Obsidian storage right into that folder. And there it's like syncing. And these are markdown files. So each of them will show versioning through Google Drive. So there's like free storage and free versioning, which is really great. And yeah, it's definitely like a program I've been using a lot for every type of note taking.
Yeah, I used to be a big Evernote user and stopped when they started down the road of enshittification. And I tried Obsidian and was a little overwhelmed by it at the time and switched to an app called Bear, which is a Mac OS note taking, very similar, where it's markdown only, but it's got syncing, but it was also a third the price of Obsidian from a yearly perspective, and I'm cheap. But one of the really neat things I think about Obsidian is there's over 2,200 different plugins for it that you can add extra functionality. It's just if there's something you want to display in a note in a different way, they probably have a plugin that'll do it for you.
I only have one plugin, and it's command where I just command it and I just type like date time and it puts like the current timestamp on it. And that's all I need. Like I need a way of just inlining dates into my notes.
I think I tried Obsidian many years ago, like when it first came out, and I think I wasn't so steeped in Markdown that I just was kind of like, meh. But like now that I live and breathe Markdown every day, I think it's time to revisit Obsidian because I'm already trying to take notes in Markdown in the Mac Notes app and getting frustrated it doesn't do it like I think it should.
I didn't even know it does it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think, and also Obsidian has an iOS app, which is nice. Looks like.
Yeah, they support all the different platforms. If you want to sync your data, it's Android, iOS, Mac, Windows, it's Linux. I know a lot of Linux users who use Obsidian.
Yeah. Thanks, Brent. I think I'm gonna try this out. I'm always looking for a good note system.
Trying it again.
Totally.
All right, Todd, what's your second one for us?
Paul and I and Cedar Grove Studios, aka Jan, just did a CircuitPython show about the CircuitPython Community Bundle. In the Arduino world, the closest equivalent is the Arduino Library Manager's list of libraries. One of my favorite ways to observe updates to that list was the Arduino Libs Twitter bot that posted whenever libraries were added or updated. And with Twitter gone, thankfully the bot has moved on to both Mastodon and Blue Sky. And I've always wondered how it got that information, and I looked into it, and I think it's just looking at the pull requests from the Arduino Library Registry GitHub, which I've done in the past. I've just looked through their PRs and seen what people have been adding to it, but that's one of the few ways that the GitHub interface is actually kind of poor to see those changes. So with this bot, you get to see it all in a nice little social media post size with a link to the actual repo. The bot itself promises no more than 6 posts per hour, so it doesn't overwhelm your feed, which I've had to unsubscribe to some other bots that I've liked because they just kind of like flooded my timeline. And I really like poking around the libraries that people have been writing to see kind of what people are thinking about, what kind of tasks they're trying to solve, and to get as a gauge on the state of the Arduino community. A couple examples that just came out as I was thinking about this. This is like maybe yesterday, the day before. There's a library called YAMLduino that lets you do YAML file parsing and writing in Arduino, which is pretty awesome because YAML has been infecting my life more and more. I'm sure I'll be using whatever the successor is to Obsidian is that's all in YAML instead of Markdown. There's a library for writing Discord bots called Ucini Discord Webhook, and we'll have links to all these in the show notes, of course. There is a library called CodeCell that's essentially a sort of board abstraction library for this tiny coin-sized ESP32C3-based board that has a LiPo charger, 9-axis IMU, and a light sensor, all in something about the size of a quarter. And like, here's an example of where the library shows you new hardware. like just looking at this library feed shows you new hardware. So that's pretty interesting. I don't do wearables, but this is like a really, really cool board for doing wearable stuff. And another one is a library called Google Find My Tools that works for not just for Arduino, but also for like Zephyr-based embedded devices. But it turns an ESP32 into a Find My device on the Google Find My network. So if you wanted to make little tokens that like joined that, so you could like track something. I've been wanting to put an air tag on my cat to see where he goes, where he gets up to. I'll have links, but Arduino libs on Fostodon, on Mastodon, and arduinolibs.bsky.social. The maintainer is someone named Tobozo. So if you do like Arduino libs, give him a shout, or give them a shout out, because I love this thing. Okay, Paul, what's your second and final thing for this week?
I recently came across a story that I was so excited to share because it combines two of my passions, vinyl records and 3D printings. But there's a catch, which I'll come to at the end of this, so just bear with me for a minute. But Amanda Gussai has one of the most in-depth tutorials and project recaps I've ever seen. She was able to use a resin 3D printer to recreate a 3D printed record that can play on a normal record player with a normal stylus. On her Instructables page, she first shares how a record works. As the needle spins along the grooves of a record, it vibrates and produces audio signals. She then walks through how she calculated the sampling rate for a 3D printer and all the math that goes along with it, which I'm not going to get into here, but trust me when I say it's detailed. She calculates the sampling frequency, revolutions per second, and inches per revolution to get a max sampling frequency of 12 kilohertz. She then prepared some test files to print to understand what might be possible with the printer and to optimize the size of the grooves in the record. She tested a few different amplitudes, depths, and groove widths, and printed 3 test prints to figure out what was possible. To do that, she used an Arduino sketch called processing to create sine waves, convert those to an STL file that could be printed. After the 3rd test was complete, she had the groove depth, the width, and the frequency range figured out. She then wrote a Python program to convert a wave file to an array of integers, then be converted into a text file. She can import that text file into the processing sketch to convert it into an STL. Her Instructables page contains examples using the song Debaser from the Pixies and New Order's Blue Monday. You can clearly understand the songs, though with the distortion it sounds worse than an AM radio station, but it's impressive for having done it herself. The catch was, this article was from 2012. There were a few giveaways in the article. When she compared 3D printers, she was talking about her resin printer. She compared it to a MakerBot and a RepRap. And right there, my radar went off that, people aren't really using those 3D printers anymore. And her Python program uses Python 2.5, which is ancient.
Wow.
Exactly. I didn't really catch it until I started reading the comments. And one of the oldest comments is from 12 years ago. But newer comments are from just a few months ago. So other people like me are just discovering it. The YouTube videos that she posted are about 6 years old. Now, she was using a commercial Object Connects 500 printer, and I'm curious to know in the last 10 to 12 years how far resin printers have come to know if you can make an even better sounding record today. In more modern news, The Guardian just published an article on February 25th also about creating your own records, but using a custom kit from Ulrich Soroso. It's a lathe cutting machine that uses a diamond needle to cut a record one at a time in real time. People in the UK are using them to create custom pressings of, say, 20 to maybe 100 records that artists or bands can sell who might not be able to afford a regular vinyl pressing. The catch with this one is Ulrich Soroso is a cash-only operation, and if you want to buy one, you'll need about 7,000 pounds hand-delivered to him in the Black Forest of Germany.
What?
So we'll have links to both of those in the show notes.
That doesn't sound sketchy at all.
No, not at all. But they talked to a number of makers who are making records that have done that. They've gone over, paid them the money in cash. It's cash only, and came home with the lathe.
That's
Wow.
really cool. Wasn't there in like the 40s or 50s like a record cutting thing you could go like and get your photo taken at an event, a little like coin operated photo thing? There was a similar thing where you could go and put a quarter in and record a little message onto a tiny record that would engrave it in real time.
And I think they're still around. I want to say that Jack White of the White Stripes has a couple record stores, one in Nashville, one in the UK. And I know at the one in Nashville, I want to say that he's got a machine that does that. I don't know if you can personally record, but he has artists in there and they press the records like as soon as the mini concert is over. I've got a couple of them. It's pretty cool.
That's amazing. I'm glad the records are still being made.
That makes two of us.
Yeah, they're getting more popular. This project's incredible. Like Amanda's work is like totally incredible. Like you're making a record from nothing. Like 3D printing is always cool because it's like additive manufacturing, and like the Guardian one's really cool too because then it's like, okay, let's like make these but like sound good. And I wonder if people have done this with like laser cutting, like as far as
Actually, she did if you visit her homepage, she's got a list of all of her projects. In 2012, she did this project, and then in 2013, she revisited it using a laser cutter. So she's been all over it.
Her website is incredible. It's got so many amazing projects all across the space. I recommend anyone go to her website to see some amazing projects.
Well, that's our show. For detailed show notes and transcripts, visit thebootloader.net. Thanks, Brent, for joining us. And until next time, stay positive.